A sudden thud against the windowpane made Catherine Anderson's hands tremble as she gripped her wheelchair. Through the frosted glass of her Montana cabin, she found herself staring into the dark, intelligent eyes of a massive grizzly bear, not through the safety of a camera lens, as she once did, but barely 3 feet away. Her heart nearly stopped when, instead of charging, the bear sat down and tilted its head, studying her with an almost human-like curiosity. Before we reveal what happened next in this extraordinary encounter, take a moment to subscribe for more incredible stories of unexpected friendships that challenge everything we think we know about the wild world around us. The morning had started like any other in Catherine's secluded cabin. At 75, her days had fallen into a quiet rhythm since the accident 15 years ago that confined her to a wheelchair. The calendar on her kitchen wall still showed last month's page. September's golden aspens were now giving way to October's early snows. She hadn't bothered to change it. Time moved differently here, on the outskirts of Glacier National Park, marked more by the changing seasons than by dates. Through her kitchen window, Catherine could see the first heavy snowflakes of the season dancing against the backdrop of pine trees. The weather report had warned of an early winter storm, but she wasn't worried. Her pantry was well stocked, thanks to her granddaughter Sarah's weekly visits, and she had long ago learned to find comfort in solitude. Her gnarled fingers wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee as her eyes drifted to the collection of photographs lining her walls. They were her own work, award-winning shots from her days as a wildlife photographer, lions in Africa, wolves in Yellowstone, and yes, bears right here in Montana. Each image told a story of patience, respect, and the raw beauty of nature. Now, they served as windows to a past life, one where she could trek for miles through wilderness with camera gear strapped to her back. The accident had changed everything. One icy road, one split second, and her adventurous life came to a screeching halt. The doctor said she was lucky to survive the rollover, but sometimes, in her darker moments, Catherine wondered if lucky was the right word. Her cameras gathered dust now, and the wilderness she once roamed freely had become a distant view through double-paned glass. The first sign that this morning would be different was the unusual silence. The regular chickadees that visited her bird feeder were conspicuously absent, and even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Catherine was about to wheel herself to the living room when movement at the tree line caught her eye. At first, she thought it was just shadows playing in the swirling snow, but then the shadows took form. A massive grizzly bear emerging from the forest with deliberate steps. Catherine's photographer instincts kicked in before her fear could surface. The bear was huge, easily over 700 pounds, with thick brown fur frosted with snow and a distinctive silver-tipped ruff around its neck. What struck her most wasn't its size, though, it was the way it moved, cautious but purposeful, heading directly toward her cabin. Catherine's mind raced through her years of wildlife experience. Grizzlies should be in their denning phase now, preparing for winter hibernation. This one showed no signs of aggression, but its behavior was unlike anything she'd encountered in her decades of wildlife photography. Her hand instinctively reached for a camera that wasn't there. As the bear drew closer, 20 feet from her window, then 15, then 10, her breath fogged the glass as she watched, transfixed. She should be afraid. She knew that. She should wheel herself to the back room, call the rangers, do something. But the same instinct that had guided her through countless wildlife encounters told her to stay still and watch. From her window, the bear stopped. Snow gathered on its broad shoulders as it stood there, nose twitching as it scented the air. Then, in a movement so gentle it seemed impossible for such a massive creature, it lowered itself to sit in the snow, eyes fixed on Catherine. Time seemed to freeze as woman and bear regarded each other through the glass. In those deep brown eyes, Catherine saw something that made her chest tighten. Not the mindless aggression people often attributed to grizzlies, but an intelligence, a consciousness that seemed to look straight through her. The bear lifted its right paw slightly, and Catherine noticed something that made her lean forward in her wheelchair. A dark stain in the fur, a slight favoring of the limp. Was it injured? Was that why it had approached a human dwelling? As if in response to her unspoken question, the bear let out a soft chuff, not a threatening sound, but almost like a greeting. Catherine felt tears welling in her eyes, though she couldn't explain why. For the first time since her accident, she felt truly seen, not as the broken photographer in the wheelchair, not as the burden her family tried so hard not to consider her, but as she truly was. The moment was shattered by the distant sound of a truck engine. The bear's ears twitched, and with surprising grace for its size, it rose and turned toward the forest before disappearing into the swirling snow. It looked back once more at Catherine, and in that glance was a promise this wouldn't be their last encounter. Catherine sat motionless long after the bear had vanished, her coffee gone cold in her hands. The logical part of her mind tried to make sense of what had just happened, but her heart held onto something deeper. In those few minutes of connection, something had awakened in her, a spark she thought had died in the accident 15 years ago. As darkness fell and the snow continued to pile up outside her window, Catherine wheeled herself to her dusty camera cabinet. For the first time in 15 years, she opened it and began cleaning her old equipment. Something told her she would need it soon. The news of Catherine's strange encounter spread through the small Montana town like wildfire. Within days, her quiet cabin became a subject of local concern, particularly for Mike Thompson, the veteran park ranger who had known her since her photography days. "Catherine, you can't be serious about letting a grizzly get that close," Mike said, pacing in her kitchen while she calmly sipped her morning coffee. His uniform was dusted with snow from the early morning patrol, and worry lines creased his weathered face. "That bear needs to be relocated before someone gets hurt." She watched the bear, Scout, as she had named it, for his careful, observant nature, appear at his usual spot near the tree line. Over the past week, his visits had become as regular as the sunrise. "Look at him," Mike said softly. "Does he look like a threat to you?" Mike moved to the window, his hand instinctively resting on his tranquilizer gun. Scout sat in the snow, his massive form peaceful against the white landscape. The bear's right paw was still held slightly aloft from the ground, confirming Catherine's suspicions about an injury. "It doesn't matter how he looks," Mike sighed. "A wild grizzly is a wild grizzly. You of all people should know that, Kathy. Remember that shoot in '95? The one that got you that National Geographic cover?" The memory flooded back. She had spent weeks tracking a mother grizzly and her cubs, maintaining a respectful distance, documenting their natural behavior. The shot that made the cover showed the mother bear's fierce protective instinct when a wolf pack got too close to her cubs. "This is different," Catherine insisted. "Scout is trying to communicate something." "Scout?" Mike's eyebrows shot up. "You named it?" "That's exactly what you shouldn't do," Mike said. "This isn't some pet. It's an apex predator." The word stung, but Catherine wheeled herself closer to the window. Scout had settled into his usual routine, occasionally glancing at the cabin while going about the business of pawing through the snow for any remnants of fall berries. She reached for her camera, now always within arm's reach, and captured his massive form against the pristine white landscape. "Remember what you taught me about wildlife photography?" she asked, adjusting her lens. "You said the key was learning to read their behavior, to understand their stories. Scout has one to tell, if we'll just listen." Mike's expression softened. He'd been the one to mentor her, teaching her the delicate balance between getting the shot and staying safe. The accident that confined her to the wheelchair had hit him hard too. He lost not just a colleague but one of the park's most passionate advocates. "Your granddaughter Sarah called me," he admitted. "She's worried about you. Says you're out on the porch in all weather waiting for this bear." Catherine lowered her camera. "Did you tell her I'm finally living again?" Before Mike could respond, Scout let out a low grunt. Both humans turned to watch as the bear attempted to dig deeper into the snow, but his injured paw clearly caused him pain. He sat back, letting out a sound that was almost a whimper. "That paw's getting worse," Catherine observed. "He's not digging because he can't. He's looking for help. Mike," she added, "or he's desperate and dangerous." Mike countered, but his voice lacked conviction. He'd spent 30 years working with wildlife, and even he had to admit there was something unusual about Scout's behavior. Catherine wheeled herself to her old photography files and pulled out a worn journal. "I've been documenting his visits," she said, opening the pages filled with notes and sketches. "His pattern, his behaviors, everything. He's intelligent, Mike. He understands boundaries. He never comes closer than the morning I first saw him, always maintains his distance. But he stays where I can see him, where I can photograph him." Mike took the journal, his ranger's training warring with his instinct to trust Catherine's judgment. The notes were meticulous, professional, exactly what he'd expect from a photographer who had once spent 6 months tracking wolf packs through Yellowstone. "The department's already getting calls," he said finally. "People are scared." Catherine sighed. "One sighting that close to town and they'll send in a removal team. You know what that could mean." Catherine's hands tightened on her wheelchair arms. She knew all too well that relocated bears often struggled to survive in new territories, and some were euthanized if deemed too habituated to humans. The thought of Scout meeting either fate made her chest ache. "Give me time," she pleaded. "Let me prove there's another way. You've always trusted my instincts with wildlife before." Mike stood at the window for a long moment, watching Scout. The bear had settled into grooming himself, occasionally favoring his injured paw. Despite his massive size, there was something almost vulnerable about him. "2 weeks," he said finally. "I'll hold off filing an official report for 2 weeks. But Catherine," he turned to face her, his expression grave, "if that bear shows any sign of aggression, or if he starts wandering closer to town, I'll have no choice. Promise me you'll be careful." Catherine nodded, relief flooding through her. As Mike headed for the door, she called after him. "Thank you for still believing in me." He paused, hand on the doorknob. "Just don't make me regret it." After he left, Catherine wheeled herself onto the porch, wrapped in warm blankets against the cold. Scout looked up at her movement, letting out a soft chuff of recognition. She lifted her camera and began photographing him, but this time with a purpose beyond documentation. Each shot needed to tell his story, to show others what she saw, not a dangerous predator, but a sentient being seeking connection. As the winter sun began to set, painting the snow in shades of pink and gold, Scout rose and limped back toward the forest before disappearing into the trees. He turned to look at Catherine, just as he did every evening. In that moment, she made a silent promise to both of them. She would find a way to help him, to protect him, no matter what it took. The accident might have taken her ability to walk, but it hadn't taken her ability to see, to understand, to connect. And in Scout's eyes, she saw a chance, not just to help a wounded animal, but to heal something in herself that had been broken for far too long. The first rays of dawn had barely touched the snow-covered landscape when Catherine heard Scout's familiar huffing sound outside. She wheeled herself to the porch, a first-aid kit balanced precariously on her lap. Today was the day she would attempt to help him. Over the past week, his injured paw had grown visibly worse, and she could no longer bear to watch him suffer. "Easy now, big fellow," she murmured as Scout emerged from the tree line. His movements were more labored than usual, the limp more pronounced. He made his way to his usual spot, but today, Catherine noticed something different in his approach, a sense of urgency, perhaps even desperation. Sarah's car pulled up just as Scout settled into the snow. Catherine's granddaughter stepped out, medical bag in hand, her face a mixture of concern and disbelief. As a veterinary student, Sarah had initially dismissed her grandma's stories about the friendly bear as the product of loneliness and isolation. But after witnessing their interactions herself, she couldn't deny the extraordinary nature of their connection. "I still think we should call a wildlife vet," Sarah said carefully, making her way up the icy path to the porch. "This is way outside my comfort zone, Grandma." Catherine's eyes never left Scout as she replied, "A wildlife vet means official reports, and official reports mean Mike has to take action. We're running out of time, Sarah. His paw is getting infected." Scout watched their exchange with his characteristic tilted head, curiosity in his eyes. Over the weeks, he had grown accustomed to Sarah's presence, seeming to understand she was part of Catherine's family. Still, he maintained a respectful distance, never approaching as closely as he did with Catherine. "Okay," Sarah breathed, setting down her medical bag. "Talk me through what you've observed about the injury." Catherine pulled out her camera and showed Sarah the detailed photos she'd taken of Scout's paw. "See here? There's something embedded deep in the pad. The way he favors it suggests it's not just a surface wound." Sarah studied the photos, her professional training overtaking her initial hesitation. "The swelling pattern does indicate a foreign object. He probably stepped on something sharp that broke off inside. In a domestic animal, I'd say it needs immediate removal and antibiotics." "Can we help him?" Catherine asked, her voice barely a whisper. Sarah bit her lip, considering. "Maybe. But we need him to trust us enough to examine the paw up close. And, Grandma, that's asking a lot from a wild grizzly." As if understanding their conversation, Scout let out a soft whimper and lifted his injured paw slightly off the ground. The gesture sent a sharp pang through Catherine's heart. She wheeled herself to the edge of the porch, ignoring Sarah's sharp intake of breath. "Scout," she called softly, using the gentle tone she'd developed over their weeks together. "We want to help you, boy. But you need to trust us." What happened next would later become part of local legend. Scout, the massive grizzly bear that had been visiting Catherine's cabin, slowly and deliberately began moving closer to the porch. His eyes remained locked with Catherine's, showing no sign of aggression or fear. Sarah stood frozen, her medical training warring with her instinct to run. "Grandma," she whispered, "what do we do?" "We help him," Catherine replied simply, her voice steady despite her racing heart. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the honey-covered piece of bread she'd prepared, a treat she'd been saving for this moment. "Scout, come show us what's hurting you. The bear approached the porch steps, each movement careful and measured. He stopped at the bottom step, close enough that Catherine could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. Slowly, he lifted his injured paw, placing it on the first step. "Sarah," Catherine said quietly, "get your supplies ready." With trembling hands, Sarah prepared a local anesthetic and surgical tools. "I can't believe we're doing this," she muttered, but her professional demeanor was taking over. The next hour passed in a surreal blur. Scout remained remarkably still as Sarah, aided by Catherine's calming presence, examined and cleaned the wound. They found what Catherine had suspected, a sharp piece of metal, possibly from an old trap, embedded deep in his pad. "Almost got it," Sarah murmured, her confidence growing as she worked. Scout occasionally grunted but remained steady, his trust in Catherine extending to her granddaughter's gentle ministrations. When the metal finally came free, Scout let out a deep breath that seemed to carry weeks of pain with it. Sarah quickly cleaned the wound and applied antibiotics, wrapping the paw in a waterproof bandage. "This is incredible," Sarah whispered, stepping back to observe their patient. "He actually let us help him. I've never seen anything like it." Scout tested his newly bandaged paw, putting slight pressure on it. The relief in his movements was immediate and visible. He looked up at Catherine, and in that moment, she saw something that brought tears to her eyes, gratitude, pure and simple. As Scout made his way back to his usual spot, moving more easily now, Sarah sat heavily on the porch steps. "Grandma, do you realize what just happened? This goes against everything we know about wild bear behavior. It's like he knew exactly what we were trying to do." Catherine smiled, watching Scout settle into the snow. "Sometimes the wild isn't as simple as we think it is, Sarah. Sometimes it has its own wisdom, its own way of reaching out to us." The story of Scout's treatment spread quickly through the local community. Some dismissed it as impossible, others wanted proof. A few locals even started driving by Catherine's cabin, hoping to catch a glimpse of the mysterious bear who trusted humans enough to let them heal him. But Catherine kept her photos and her detailed notes private, protecting Scout from too much human attention. She understood that what they shared was precious and rare, a connection that transcended the usual boundaries between wild and tame, broken and whole. That evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, Scout remained longer than usual at his spot near the cabin. His bandaged paw was propped comfortably in front of him, and his eyes never left Catherine as she sat on her porch, camera in hand. "You're teaching me too, you know," she told him softly. "About trust, about healing, about finding strength in vulnerability." Scout's response was a gentle chuff, a sound that had become as familiar to Catherine as her own heartbeat. In that moment, she knew their journey together was far from over. It was, in many ways, just beginning. A commotion from the tree line drew everyone's attention. Scout had emerged, his massive form moving with a grace that still amazed Catherine despite their weeks together. The officials immediately reached for their tranquilizer guns. "Stop." Catherine wheeled herself down the PCH ramp she'd rarely used before Scout came into her life. "Just watch him, please." Scout, seeming to sense the tension, stopped at his usual spot. He sat in the snow, calm and dignified, his intelligent eyes taking in the scene. The bandage on his paw was nearly gone now, the wound almost healed. One of the reporters lifted his camera, but Scout didn't react to the flash. Instead, he kept his gaze fixed on Catherine, as if waiting for a cue that everything was all right. "This isn't natural behavior," the second official muttered, but there was uncertainty in his voice. "Bears don't act like this." "Maybe," Mike said slowly, "we don't know as much about how bears can act as we think we do." He turned to Catherine. "Show them your notes." Catherine wheeled herself back inside and returned with her photography journal. The officials leafed through pages of detailed observations, behavior patterns, and photographs documenting Scout's visits. "Look at the progression," she urged. "He never comes closer than that spot. He maintains boundaries. He's not seeking human food or interaction, he's seeking connection. There's a difference." The reporters had started taking notes, and Catherine could already imagine the headlines. "Wild bear forms unlikely friendship with disabled photographer," or "Conservation crisis, when wild animals choose human contact." "The law is clear," the first official said, but he sounded less certain. "Human safety has to be our priority, and a grizzly that's lost its fear of humans." "Scout hasn't lost his fear," Catherine interrupted. "He's chosen to trust. There's a difference there too. And if you'll let me prove it, I think we might learn something important about wildlife behavior and conservation." A soft chuff from Scout drew their attention again. The bear had stood up and was moving slowly back toward the forest, pausing occasionally to look back at the gathered humans. There was nothing threatening in his movements, nothing that suggested a dangerous predator. "Give me 1 month," Catherine pleaded. "Let me document everything properly. If Scout shows any sign of aggressive or problematic behavior, I won't fight the relocation order. But if he continues to demonstrate that bears are capable of more complex relationships than we've assumed, think what that could mean for conservation efforts." Mike stepped in. "I'll take personal responsibility for monitoring the situation, daily checks, regular reports. We can turn this into a proper study." The officials exchanged looks. The reporters waited, cameras ready. Finally, the first official spoke. 1 month. But we'll be setting up camera traps around your property, and at the first sign of trouble." "You won't see any trouble," Catherine assured him, relief flooding through her. "Scout understands more than you think." As the crowd dispersed and the vehicles pulled away, Catherine remained on her porch, watching Scout's dark form at the edge of the forest. The morning sun had broken through the mist, catching the silver tips of his fur. "We did it, boy," she whispered. "But now we have to prove them all wrong." Scout's response was to settle back into his usual spot, beginning his morning routine as if nothing had happened. But Catherine knew everything had changed. They were no longer just an elderly woman in a wheelchair and a wounded bear who had found each other. They had become a test case, an opportunity to challenge everything people thought they knew about the boundaries between wild and tame, between animal intelligence and instinct. As she lifted her camera to begin another day of documentation, Catherine felt a familiar spark of purpose. Once, she had used her photography to show the world the raw beauty of wildlife. Now she would use it to prove that sometimes the most profound connections come in the most unexpected forms. Scout looked up at the click of her camera, his eyes meeting hers with that uncanny understanding that had started this whole journey. They had 1 month to change minds and save his freedom. Catherine intended to make every moment count. The Montana winter had settled in earnest, blanketing Catherine's world in pristine white. But on this particular morning, the serenity was shattered by the urgent ringing of her phone. Sarah's voice trembled as she delivered the news. "A young boy has wandered away from a hiking group near your property. "They're organizing search parties," Sarah said, "but Grandma, the temperature is dropping fast, and there's another storm coming." Catherine wheeled herself to the window where Scout was already in his usual spot. Over the past 3 weeks, she had documented every visit, every interaction, building a case for his continued freedom. The official's deadline loomed just a week away. "How far away was the boy last seen?" she asked, her mind racing. "About 2 miles from your cabin. They're focusing the search north, but—" Sarah's voice caught. "They're worried about bears." Catherine studied Scout through the window. In their weeks together, she'd learned to read his body language like a book. Today, something was different. He seemed alert, restless, his nose lifted to the wind. "I'll call you back," Catherine said, ending the call despite Sarah's protests. She wheeled herself onto the porch, camera in hand. Scout turned to look at her, and in that moment, she made a decision that would either doom or save them both. "Scout," she called out, her voice clear in the frigid air. "Find him." The bear's ears perked up at her voice. She pulled out an old hiking sock the search team had provided for scent and held it up. Scout rose to his full height, nose working the air. "Please," Catherine whispered. "Show them what you can do." As if understanding the urgency in her voice, Scout moved toward the porch. He sniffed the sock carefully, then turned toward the forest. But instead of disappearing into the trees, he stopped and looked back at her, letting out a soft chuff. Catherine's heart raced. "You want me to follow?" Another chuff, more insistent this time. With trembling hands, Catherine reached for the all-terrain attachment she'd ordered for her wheelchair, a modification that had arrived just days ago. She'd been afraid to test it in the snow, but now there was no choice. "Lead the way," she said, securing her camera around her neck. What followed would later be described as either the most reckless or the most remarkable act in local conservation history. Scout moved slowly through the forest, consistently checking back to ensure Catherine could follow in her wheelchair. He chose paths wide enough for her wheels, occasionally waiting when she struggled with deeper snow. Catherine documented everything with her camera, even as her fingers grew numb with cold. They traveled for what felt like hours, moving deeper into the forest than she had been since her accident. Suddenly, Scout's behavior changed. He lifted his head, nostrils flaring, and let out a low rumble. Then he veered off their path, moving with purpose toward a dense thicket of pines. Catherine's wheelchair couldn't follow through the tight spaces, but she could see Scout's massive form pushing through the branches. Her heart pounded as she lifted her camera, zoom lens focused on the scene. A small whimper emerged from the thicket, followed by Scout's gentle chuffing sound, the same one he used with her. Then, incredibly, she heard a child's voice. "Nice bear." Through her lens, Catherine captured the moment Scout emerged from the thicket, gently guiding a small boy of about 7. The child was walking under his own power but seemed dazed, his coat crusted with snow. "Over here," Catherine called out, her voice carrying in the winter stillness. "I'm here." The boy looked up, relief flooding his tear-stained face. Scout stayed with him, matching his slow pace until they reached Catherine. "I got lost," the boy mumbled, shivering. But the bear, he wasn't scary. He made warm noises. Catherine quickly wrapped him in her emergency blanket, pulling out her phone to call in their location. As she did, Scout settled into the snow nearby, maintaining a protective watch. Within 20 minutes, the forest was alive with the sound of approaching searchers. The boy, Tommy, she learned, had wandered nearly 3 miles from his group. Without Scout's keen sense of smell and Catherine's trust in him, he might not have been found in time. As the rescue team approached, Catherine quickly began shooting photos. She captured Scout's calm demeanor, his protective positioning, and the way he waited until Tommy was safely with the medics before slowly backing away. "Wait," Tommy called out as Scout turned to leave. "Thank you, Bear." Scout paused, looking back at the boy, then at Catherine. In his eyes, she saw everything she'd been trying to prove these past weeks: intelligence, compassion, and a depth of understanding that defied conventional wisdom about wild animals. The story exploded across local and national media. Catherine's photos told an undeniable story: a grizzly bear, supposedly one of nature's most fearsome predators, had not only helped locate a lost child but had shown extraordinary gentleness and awareness in doing so. Wildlife officials, who had been prepared to relocate Scout, found themselves facing a public relations challenge. How could they justify removing a bear that had just demonstrated such remarkable behavior? A week later, Catherine sat in her usual spot on the porch, Scout in his place in the snow. Mike Thompson stood beside her, holding a new document. "It's unprecedented," he said, shaking his head in amazement. "The department is establishing a new protected area around your property. Scout will be allowed to stay, and we'll be setting up a research program to study bear-human interactions." Catherine smiled, watching Scout rest contentedly in the fresh snow. He knew, somehow, he knew, that saving Tommy would save himself too. "Maybe," Mike said thoughtfully, "he just knew it was the right thing to do. Like someone else I know who refused to give up on him." As if acknowledging their conversation, Scout lifted his head and let out a soft chuff. The sound carried across the snow-covered yard, not the call of a wild beast, but the greeting of a friend who had found his place in the world. Catherine lifted her camera, capturing the moment in the growing dusk, with Scout's dark form silhouetted against the snow. She felt a profound sense of completion. They had done more than just save each other. They had opened a door to a new understanding of what was possible when humans and wildlife chose trust over fear. Spring arrived in Montana, painting Catherine's world in shades of green and gold. From her porch, she watched Scout emerge from the forest, his winter coat shedding in patches, revealing the sleek dark fur beneath. A year had passed since their first encounter, and everything had changed. The cabin's walls, once covered only in old photographs, now displayed a new collection. Catherine's image of Scout had earned her another National Geographic cover, this time showing the gentle giant guiding a lost child through the winter forest. But it was the smaller personal photos that meant the most to her: Scout waiting patiently as she photographed birds, Scout showing a group of wildlife researchers his remarkable capacity for understanding, Scout teaching them all what was possible when fear gave way to trust. "There's my boy," she called out softly. As Scout settled into his usual spot, he responded with a familiar chuff that had become the soundtrack of her days. Behind him, two small cubs tumbled through the grass. Scout had become a father, and to everyone's amazement, he had chosen to bring his family to Catherine's sanctuary. Sarah pulled up in her truck, now emblazoned with the logo of the newly established Bear-Human Connection Research Center. Her granddaughter had found her calling, combining her veterinary skills with groundbreaking research into bear intelligence and behavior. "The latest paper's been accepted," Sarah announced, climbing the porch steps with a thick manuscript in hand. "They're calling Scout's case a paradigm shift in wildlife conservation." Catherine smiled, watching the cubs wrestle under their father's watchful eye. "They're finally catching up to what we've known all along." The sanctuary had grown beyond anything they'd imagined. What started as a protected area around Catherine's cabin had expanded into a 1,000-acre reserve, where researchers studied peaceful coexistence between humans and wildlife. Scout had become their ambassador, challenging everything science thought it knew about bear behavior. "The school groups are coming today," Sarah reminded her. "Tommy's class is among them." Catherine nodded, touching the well-worn camera in her lap. Tommy, the Boy Scout had saved, had become a regular visitor. Now 10, he dreamed of becoming a wildlife photographer himself, and Catherine had begun teaching him the art of capturing not just images but stories. As if on cue, the sound of buses echoed through the valley. Scout's cubs scampered back to the tree line, but he remained in his spot, calm and dignified. They had worked out a careful protocol for these educational visits. The children would stay on the viewing platform Catherine had built, while Scout demonstrated his remarkable intelligence from a safe distance. "Remember when they wanted to relocate him?" Sarah mused, helping Catherine position her wheelchair for the presentation. "Now they're studying him instead." The buses pulled up, and excited children spilled out, their voices hushing as they spotted Scout. Tommy broke away from the group, running to Catherine with a camera clutched in his hands. "Did you see the cubs?" he whispered excitedly. "They're getting so big." Catherine squeezed his hand. "Ready to help me teach today?" The boy nodded eagerly, and together they began sharing Scout's story with the wide-eyed students. Catherine showed her photographs, while Tommy recounted his rescue, describing how gentle Scout had been, how carefully he had guided him through the forest. "But why isn't he mean?" a small girl asked. "Bears are supposed to be scary." "We only think they're scary because we don't understand them," Catherine explained. "Scout taught us that animals are capable of so much more than we imagine, if we're willing to listen, to observe, to trust." As if to demonstrate her point, Scout rose and performed what had become his signature routine. He walked to each of his marked boundaries, showing the children how he respected the limits they had established together. He demonstrated his understanding of simple commands, his ability to communicate through body language, his gentle patience with his cubs. The children watched in awe, their phones forgotten in their hands. This wasn't a circus performance or a trained act. It was something far more profound. It was proof that the line between wild and tame wasn't as sharp as humans had always believed. After the buses departed, Catherine sat with Tommy, teaching him how to capture the evening light on Scout's fur. "You know," she said, "before Scout came into my life, I thought my story was over. The accident took away so much, my mobility, my career, my purpose. But Scout showed me that endings can become beginnings if you're brave enough to trust them." "Do you think there are other bears like him?" Tommy asked, attributing his focus. "I think there's more intelligence and emotion in the wild than we've ever given credit for," Catherine replied. "Scout didn't change. He just showed us what was possible when we stopped letting fear guide our interactions with wildlife." The sun was setting now, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Scout's cubs had emerged again, playing near their father, as Catherine and Tommy photographed them. Sarah worked nearby, taking notes for her research, while Mike Thompson, now the sanctuary's head ranger, conducted his evening rounds. "You know what the best part is?" Tommy said suddenly, lowering his camera. "Nobody's afraid anymore. Not of Scout, not of the cubs, not of being out here. You and Scout changed everything." Catherine felt tears welling in her eyes as she watched Scout with his family. The bear who had approached her window on that snowy morning had done more than save himself. He had helped create a place where fear gave way to understanding, where barriers between species could be bridged with patience and trust. As darkness settled over the sanctuary, Scout gathered his cubs with a gentle rumble before heading into the forest for the night. He approached Catherine's porch, keeping to their established boundaries. In the fading light, their eyes met, the photographer in her wheelchair and the bear who had changed her world. "Good night, old friend," she whispered. Scout's response was a familiar chuff that had come to mean so much. Then he turned, leading his cubs into the forest that was their home, but not their boundary. Tomorrow, like every day for the past year, he would return, continuing to teach humans that sometimes the wildest thing of all is to choose trust over fear, connection over isolation, and love over everything else. Catherine lifted her camera one last time, capturing Scout's silhouette against the twilight sky. In that moment, she wasn't just taking a photograph. She was documenting a revolution in the way humans and wildlife could coexist.